We're back with the Building the Groundwork podcast. Today, I have a good friend, Mets Kramer. Metz is CEO and founder of Visibility. We'll get into all the behind the scenes of Visibility, the dealer business system that he's built. But welcome, Metz.
Thanks, man. Good to see you. Like you said, it's been too long.
It has been. Did we meet first? I guess 4 years ago. You were focused on what was called the digital dealer at the time, right?
Yeah, the digital dealer is sort of like a thought project that we talk about, this hypothetical dealer of the future, or what dealers should be striving to try and accomplish. So yeah, it's always a good discussion, and it's not that hard to be out ahead of where the industry is.
No, not hard at all.
I think why we gelled so well is we felt that very same way.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a background. You worked for a cat dealer in the product support arena for a while. That's how you started your career?
Yeah. I started as a management trainee at Tormont, and then got into service and product support stuff. And yeah, but it was a unique dealership because it's a dealership that had a really strong information systems team, and that didn't really sit around and wait for CAT to solve their information problems. And so they took that on, and that made it a good fit for me, especially. So
what did they do really well with information that you see others lack? So
they, and this kind of goes to, so I got involved really early on. I was a shop supervisor, and we were still scheduling the shop on a clipboard, and that drove me nuts. And then I found out that the IT group was starting a software project to build a scheduling system. So I got myself very much involved in that, and that got me in touch and got to know the CIO at Tormont Industries very well. And he appreciated my ability to work in the organization, in the actual operation, and understand the operation, but also understand information needs and how to use data. But Mike was really good in that. He led the organization in the direction, and he, from his perspective, thought the organization needed to go by using information. And so by putting information out in front of people and tools out in front of people, he drew the business in the direction that he felt the dealership needed to go. I think that's really an effective way to use a position like that and to use information.
What year was this?
I started there in 2001 out of school.
So just thinking about it, I don't know many dealers that have the role of a CIO, even today.
Oh, I think it's very true. I haven't really come across too many even in my work, if at all.
Yeah, and they had one back in 2000. That's really interesting.
Yeah, Tormont's a really large organization, right? Even back then, they were pushing $2 billion or whatever, $1.5 billion. So
you actually then were exposed early to a dealer that was very kind of forward thinking. So, and how did you? So that I would imagine you would have had a different reference point. Right? You probably thought that all dealers operated that way then, right? How did you see that that's not the case?
So in my second role there, when I set up the contract management group, and one of my projects there was to build contract management software. Then because it was a fairly unique approach to it, and we were doing the tools, I ended up speaking at a lot of dealer conferences, and that's when you start, seeing people going, oh wait, you have that, and we've been wanting to do something like that, and eventually those products all sold off to lots of dealers. So
interesting. Yeah.
So they solved the needs that the dealers had without waiting for CAT.
So does Caterpillar start looking at how far ahead you guys were and started trying to push other of dealers on their network towards that and go along those?
Well, initially, CAT had their own projects. They'd be like, "Oh, we're doing equipment monitoring software," and Mike's response, and I think this is one of these key things that kind of stuck in my mindset for my entire career. Mike's mindset was, if I can justify the spend over 2 or 3 years, then I'll just do it. And if Cat comes back with like the next best thing, then we'll drop our product and we'll switch over to the Cat version. It rarely did Cat come up with anything better.
Interesting.
I mean, there's a whole DBS history there as well, the big dealer system that all the Cat dealers run and all the stuff that
Sure.
happened. But yeah, and I think that's kind of an interesting mentality, right? Yeah, people are so fearful of building themselves tools, and they just weren't. And they didn't need like a 5-10 year run of it to justify it. They're just like, we need to solve this problem, and so let's put some resources on it and rethink it in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's a great culture to be a part of, right? Because
true application of information, true sort of learn as you go, improve. The early team was really good. They had really good developers who were also good at understanding the business, and they would live and work with one team, one area of the business, learn that area of the business, and be the ones basically sitting there writing the code.
yeah, I mean, my experience was the opposite. My experience was old school dealer. Forget about valuing data and information, but it was just like, this is the way we've done it. These are the problems that just learn to exist with those problems, and let's just talk about the problems every year.
Yeah, and don't do anything about it.
Right. Well, you just have to accept that that's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a component of, wanting, by putting this stuff in place and doing these projects, there was a component of trying to understand the company better, but also the customer. And so Tormont was really early on doing e-commerce portals. And one of the things they did was do like invoice approval process for customers. So customers would sign into the portal and deal with it and then get their download of all of the payables that they had. But the real idea was to get inside and understand how the customer operated. At one point I remember him saying, I want to do like a quarry production metrics site for quarry customers. And it's like, the real reason I want to do it is because I want to understand what they're moving, how much they're producing. And once I understand how much they're doing and how they think and how they work, then we can talk to them differently. We can talk to them in their language, I kind of learned the same thing years later at Liebherr, where we had all these really high-end, expensive material handlers. And the customer's perspective on the material handlers were like, well, they're just, they're like buying hammers. We just need them. But what they really like is their $6 million shredder. And that's the focus of their business. So, and once you realize that changes your perspective on what it is you're providing them.
Sure.
Yeah.
You also had a stint in the sales arena as well, which I didn't realize until recently. And you'd given a couple talks at like AED about that.
Yeah.
What was your experience in sales?
So my sales experience was sort of this information-driven and strategic approach to sales, right? And instead of traditional sales that you and I like to poke fun of, pickup truck and miles, it was, like, what should we sell where, and who should we be selling it to and why, and so designing both not just pricing, but also marketing and who to focus on. And I think that's one of those things that I've seen done so many times in our industry, and you've no doubt seen it. You get this shotgun blast into the US with a new product, and they try and sell a machine everywhere without focusing in a market, hitting that that early adopter, breaking through that early adopter kind of market percent or market share. And so there's countless OEMs out there that are selling 2-3% of market share all over the country, but never replace, one of the mainline producer or providers or dealers, because no one really adopts it as a standard product, as a standard brand. So I always thought that
It's
was cool.
funny. Yeah, the data driven, people roll their eyes very quickly. It is a relationship business, as people love to say.
Yeah, and relationship is also built on information. It's
Correct.
like I'm not a good friend to you if I don't know when your birthday is. That's
Well,
data.
yeah, right. It's funny. What you're talking about is just a smarter approach. It's like, actually, you say shotgun blasters is right, right? It's like, hey, maybe we should think about more like who this is a good fit for,
Mhm.
instead of just trying to talk to everybody and anybody. And then understanding, your background, obviously, understanding the why. What does, because you learn like customers, not everybody has the same needs, right? And how to talk to people is very important.
Yeah, and exactly understanding why someone's buying something from you. I mean, one of the
Hmm.
problems with shotgun is, and as you see it, I think in some of the new brands coming into the U.S., you're getting sales partially because sure I'll try it, or my favorite one is I'm pissed off at my main dealer, and so I'm going to buy one of yours just to let them know that I'll buy something different. And then it
Sure.
sits. And I've had that conversation with some of those types of smaller dealers and like, do you know where your machines are that you've sold? You've sold 300 or 400 units now. Like,
Hmm.
where are they? Are they being used? Are they parked in the back of someone's yard because it was that machine and they're not putting hours on it? And so
Hmm.
you think you're making sales, but you're not building a market. You're just
Hmm.
making sales.
Right. That's it. So you went and you became a consultant. That's after Liebherr?
Yeah. Yeah.
What led to that move?
A lot of it was personal. I just gotten remarried. And my wife's in the film and television, and back then she was in theater, and
Hmm.
so she's all over the place. And I just decided that I wasn't gonna, spend my life in an office again. I was gonna do something that I was flexible, and if
Hmm.
she had a contract here or a contract there, I could work from there, and just be more flexible.
And you would consult with dealers. Those are your customers.
Yeah, yeah. I started working with dealers, some manufacturers. And in all honesty, it didn't last all that long before the information system stuff got snuck its way back into my life.
Hmm.
It was also an attempt to get away from that, but that didn't work.
And so you saw the need, which is what led to you to develop the product you have today. And so how did that really start and then build?
Yeah, so one of the things that, just as a sort of side project, we built a CRM, and we built that CRM to be equipment focused. So the core information is equipment, right, and not
Hmm.
just and Tormont was good at this in their CAT system, but other dealer systems don't do it as well. And that is just tracking what your customers own, because that's the core information of your relationship with your customer, whether it's your
Hmm.
machines you sold them or just other machines, right? It creates an image and an understanding of what they do, what their fleet is, what their needs are, and where your future sales opportunities are. So I
Hmm.
built this CRM. I used it largely as a demo, and for my own purposes, but as a demo in some presentations at AED and IEDA
Hmm.
on how to use data and how to use CRM properly in an equipment dealership.
Hmm.
And then I did some consulting with people who would need help to find a good CRM. So I would help them, and then just started asking me like, well, why can't we just use yours? It's done.
Hmm.
It's right there. Like, well, yeah, it's not really production ready yet. And so after a few of those requests, we made it production ready, and then kind of entered into the software space.
Interesting. So it was, you were starting to help people, but they wanted your product, and so it wasn't even your by design. It's just you kind of fell into it and saw the need in the market.
Yeah, even for my AED presentation, I built out the equipment module in Zoho CRM. I just hired a guy and he built it out for me, and now it was there. But
Hmm.
I don't know, something about something purpose built for the industry that got people attracted.
So it started as a CRM, and then what has it evolved into?
Yeah, it started as a CRM, and one of the things that really got going was like advertising and marketing integration, because that's where people really struggle.
Mm-hmm.
To take their core information and get it into other systems. So they're all doing that manually. So we did MailChimp and stuff, email campaigning integration, so that all your contacts and tagging and segmentation goes over there. And we started doing advertiser platforms, data feeds of equipment, so that you would have all that information and not have to manually do everything, right? And so that's where we started, and then we were approached by a couple of dealers who were very unhappy with what they had. Very old legacy type systems, old AS400 based kind of rental systems and whatnot. And they just said, well, we like your CRM. Like, could you build the rental module? And I'm like, yeah, I could do a rental module. And it was COVID, so I was sitting at home, not doing much. And so, sure, let's build a rental system. Let's build an inspection module. And then when that was done, the question was, well, we just want everything. I was like, okay, we'll take another year and we'll build everything else.
Can you code yourself? Can you program, or are you the architect and the idea, and you have people that you work with who can actually build the actual software?
So I am the data architect, and that's just understanding the relationship between all the objects in a dealer world, from finance objects to companies and locations and people and equipment and parts and all the relationships and how they relate. So I do that, and then I can do a little bit of SQL coding. It's not it gets frowned upon by real coders, like that's ugly code, Metz. But it definitely made it much easier to develop all the system logic, because I can write it and test it rather than try and explain it to someone who doesn't understand the business. And now we're kind of past that, and like all of my code is being converted by our developers into the way it should be done, now that all the logic is there and it works. So my goal is to be free of coding by January 1st.
Well, that's not far away.
No. I've got like 2 little things to finish, and then hopefully I'm actually done.
So CRM turns into rental module, turns into everything. So selling equipment, the accounting side of the business, everything to do with the business system is what you guys build now.
Yeah, and like with the one caveat being that we want to focus on the things that I understand or we understand better than other software people, which is the actual dealership operational side. And then we integrate in all of the things that other people are better at. So accounting is what other people are better at, and Intuit and Sage spend 10 times my budget on just their accounting system every year. So why would I try and copy that?
Sure.
So we believe heavily in integrations, and this idea that you're really looking at tools. Like people are enamored by tools, right? Like people in our industry, they get presented tools, and that's what they sort of assume is the software, right? And so I'm trying to get people to think differently and say, the thing that you see is the tool. What you have to think about is the data, and that data is in a place, because that data is going to keep moving with you, even if at times you outgrow the tools. And that's kind of how you get back to this, Mike at Tormont idea. We'll build a tool, but it was all built on top of their database servers, and that had the dealer software in it. And the tool, if it was old and tired or we got it wrong, you could just toss it and build a new one. And I think that's a much smarter approach, but it's hard. People get enamored by the tool.
Sure. Yeah. What is the sales cycle like for you? Because we both know dealers. I'd imagine it's lengthy. It can be very frustrating.
It's well, in a true marketing sense, it's very segmented. I have customers who are small dealers who need simple tools and just a couple of modules, and the sales cycle there can be as little as 24 hours. I did a demo yesterday for a dealer. They signed today. CRM, rentals, work orders, right? But they don't have anything else. The decision-making process is simple, and so that's that segment. And then you get into other segments, you get into a 5 or 10 branch dealer. Yeah, it's going to be a year, especially when you start talking about switching their accounting. So we're lucky in bringing this to market that we can address all of those market sizes, all of those dealer sizes. That, we can go to a big dealer, and we work with a few of them where we do add-on tools to their legacy ERP, and then in time we can migrate them fully, but at least train and get people used to and add on the things they're missing.
Who are the drivers for your customer? Like, who does it seem to resonate the most? Like, who is the champion of a project that will sign with you? Is it like a CFO? Is it like a sales manager, or who's your ideal person within that account?
I try really hard to get owners involved to the extent that dealers that have owners still that aren't too big, but ownership also is really important in implementation. That if the owner gets involved and sends the message that this is an important project, then the project goes better. So it's always good to engage them. I think you've learned this too. I think the sales side in our industry, they kind of are wary of software tools.
Sure.
So it's often service and rental people that drive it. And after that, it's, finance people.
That makes sense because there's more of those transactions. And so, if you're not, those transactions happen every day. Sales happen every day, but, they seem to cluster at the end of a month. But whereas, you're fixing machines every day, you're selling parts every day. If you're using a 15-year-old business system and it's holding you back and it's creating a lot of headaches for people who are trying to get work done every day, I could see why that would be. People on that side of the house would be pushing for something new.
Yeah, it's sort of unfortunate too because, as you know, most of senior management in dealerships comes out of sales. And because they're not used to operating in systems, they tend to think the systems aren't that important. And eventually I find that, say like parts and service people, they just get used to with what they have, and their real focus is getting the job done, get the machine fixed, get it out, whatever. And so eventually they're quiet. It's one of the things I've learned doing this is, eventually people stop telling you what they would like to see changed. They find their workaround, they get used to it, they stop caring because they just want to get the job done. So it's always nice to get fresh eyes in.
Yeah, definitely. It's you brought up something interesting that I like to talk about. Leadership at dealerships seems to be a lot around salespeople. You've been in it longer than I have. Has it always been that way? Do you see it changing?
I think you see it occasionally change, or instances where it's slightly different. Like Tormont at the moment has a president that originally started on service side and was like product support manager, and then became branch manager, and then got into sales side, and then looked more traditional. But there's a background there. But I think by and large you see it. People who post the big numbers. Sell a bunch of machines, you look like the big guy because you sold $20 million.
Right.
So, but the parts guy did 100 times more transactions and potentially made more profit.
Yep, it's how it's always been. I don't see it changing.
Yeah, especially depending on how you analyze a machine deal, right? Like, what do you really include in your margin analysis? Do you include all those lunches for the last 6 months? No, no, that's just operating costs. So it's like, oh look, we
No, yeah.
made this much money. Like, yeah,
It's just at the time of the sale.
yeah,
What was
exactly.
right?
Yeah, and you get
That-
people fighting to not, don't include that, or yeah, I said that we do their like the first services for the first year. I just said that. I'm like, oh, well, then we should add that in the deal. Like we should
That
show.
was
Wow.
always, yeah.
Oh no no
That
no.
was tough. And you having a product support background, like you could, the amount of times that I would see when it was like the moment the sales department let the service department know like what they committed to as part of the sale, you could just see just the shoulder slumped, and it's like
Yeah, like, and I sold it with this thumb. I'm like, okay, did you include installation of the thumb? No, I just sold them the thumb. so,
exactly,
so
yeah,
who's paying for installation? Well, I guess we'll just do it. I'm like, okay.
yeah, and you only have an hour to do it. Yeah, they're here to pick up the machine.
Yeah. And,
What have you seen? Have you seen any evolution in terms of servicing customers in your time, like advancement, innovation at all, or is it primarily done the same?
I think there are definitely projects here and there that improve, communication, say, in service, how they communicate with customers, but it's still very from the hip. I still come across dealers who their entire focus is to, get it fixed, get it done, get it out. And then when all the paperwork starts coming in the mail, give them all the dollars they spent, they have no idea where it was from, and so you kind of work through that. I think we're starting to see a little bit of, on the rental side, sort of a digital rental process that people can start to rent online. I think parts sales is still way behind where it should be for most dealers, and most dealers are 100% reliant on the OEM's platforms like Cat's Parts Store, and then they get the orders pushed over. But that not every OEM even has that, so those other dealers can't even offer that unless they figure out all the tech. So, and that kind of gets you back to the whole digital dealership idea, right? Like, what does it really mean? When you get to your dealer's website, are you presented with the 67-year history of the dealership and who started it? And if you go to Amazon's website, there's no homepage that says Amazon was started by so and so, and we're located here. And like somewhere, if you look hard enough, you'll find shop now.
Right.
They come right in, and you're like, you're here to shop, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this is what you looked at last time. And like, that's, for me, that's like the digital dealership. Is you go to the dealership's website, and they're like, hey, Metz, we kind of remember you from your cookie there. And we looked up your file, and we can see that you own 47 backhoes and no excavators. And so here's our backhoe inventory on the website, since you're not going to be interested in something else. And that I can't wait to see, but I haven't seen it yet. So
I was going to ask you, if you were to start a dealer, say you acquire one, or you were to start one from scratch, what would it look like? Obviously, it would have elements of what you call the digital dealership, but like in some detail behind it. You're starting down that road, and I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to recognize that, and we've talked about this plenty, that the majority of modern buyers know what they want to buy because they've researched it. They're talking to you because they've made the decision, by and large, and that they would like multiple channels in order to deal with you. And I think we see this. There's definitely projects out there of almost coming at it from both ends of the market. Like, I've seen really successful used but small equipment sales that just moves a ton of units online. People don't actually come in and kick the tires anymore. They just see it.
Mhm.
And then on the other end, I've seen it really expensive equipment, you know, pushing $1 million piece of machinery, which you can never see anyway. It's coming from factory,
Mhm.
right? And so people are getting used to it from the two channels, but I think you still have to give people multiple tools. Like you might get the person who comes there and says, "Okay, I want to talk to someone." Okay, make that easy. You know, don't fill
Sure.
out a form and then hope
Love
someone calls you
forms.
back. You know, um,
The forms on dealer websites are brutal. They are so brutal. Yeah, they don't even really ask relevant questions. They're hard. Yeah, there's a million questions too. It's pretty rough. I looked at a ton in the very beginning of our company,
do you ever test them
and
out and just be like, send messages,
I
see
did,
how
I
fast they'll
did, and
get back
that
to you?
was pretty tough. Yeah, well, and so like somewhat to that point, I used to do it internally at our own company. Like I would call our phone numbers like on our website just
Yeah,
to see how many times I would get through to someone. And spoiler alert, it was not that frequent. It was less than 50% would I get to a person.
yeah,
Yeah, there's so many areas that that can be improved. And it all, like, I like your idea of, customer comes to your website, hey, you own 47 backhoes, and here's our backhoe inventory, but also last probably based on like hour ranges, you could be buying these parts, these filter kits, or you're probably due for like a suggested service in a checkout.
yeah.
Why don't you think there's been any movement towards something like that?
I think from what I've seen, part of the problem is that most dealers' backends are really old. And so to do deep integrations or to do, real transactions, it's really hard to push it back in, And so I think that limits it. So you'll see sort of newish support tools or initiatives, but like the part sale thing is a key item there. Getting a parts transaction done on a website and putting it in front of a parts person or a warehouse and finishing that sale in the
Mm-hmm.
dealer software properly, that's hard if the software just is old and you don't know how to push data into it. And
Mm-hmm.
so only if I think some people have done the projects to do it and have built the connections in to be able to do it, but it's not that accessible, and it should be.
It should be. Yeah, it just, for me, it starts with, like, wouldn't you want, you said multiple channels. I agree. Like, wouldn't you want it to be easier for more people to do business with your company? And yes, multiple channels. There will be people who will want to come by and kick the tires or come in person. No one's saying that, and that's funny when we have these conversations. That's usually where people go who are from the industry for a long time. It's like they feel like they're just going to get replaced, and that it's
Yep.
going to be. And I think that is, you know, part of my opinion is that I feel like dealers have boxed themselves in a corner, and they have these large teams, and they feel like if they invest in some of these things, then they're forcing a decision like, do I trim this team? Do I need all of these people? And also they've been saying for so long it's a relationship business. So in a way, are they admitting that it's not? And
Yeah,
I think they kind of tie themselves into knots a little bit.
I think so. I think there's some confirmation bias. Like if you really make your goal to say achieve 100% market share, whether that's just even capturing all of say your service work that's available to you from your equipment. If you
Hmm.
make that a goal, then you have to challenge yourself and say, you know, what's preventing me? But if your goal is to do 25% market share on surface, then you'll find that 20% that is willing to work the way that you work, right?
Hmm.
Like all my customers love me dropping donuts off. I'm like, well, you have customers, and those are the ones you think are your only customers, right? It's not the full data set. It's a subset that you've pre-filtered and confirm your bias. So, but if I were to tell you, you have to figure out how to address every single account in your file and talk to every one of them and figure out how they want to deal with you, well, you're going to find a bunch of guys that don't want donuts. But
I do think you're right too, where you say you have you have dealer OEM. So a lot of dealers are utilizing what the OEM provides in terms of tools.
Yep.
And OEMs lack software development capabilities. It's true. And so I'll cut them some slack on that front because it's not easy. Definitely having now done it ourselves here as a tech company, it's not easy to build software. But it is like these major OEMs are large, companies, $50 billion a year, $20 billion a year, and they're not producing tools that help drive business.
No, I think why are software startups always more agile and faster? Why can they produce something and then eventually they sort of grind into a halt? I think part of the problem is a software engineering, software industry problem. There are these assumptions that you have to do certain things certain ways. And then as soon as you get bigger, and you're going to run into it too, someone will be like, oh, I've worked on big teams and we have to have a scrum guy and we have to have this guy and that guy. And it's like, that's not what got you there. What got you there was people who understood the vertical they're trying to do and could go as far as possible. But I think the software industry itself, has a terrible track record of success in completing projects for whatever. I think the culture of how software teams work is a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I'm sure with your experiences similar to ours, is that in a young company, a startup, you can't really lie to yourself. I mean, you can lie to yourself, but then you'll go out of business. Where like that's what leads to the term pivot, and it leads to experimentation. Because if something isn't working, like it forces you to, and whereas like in the larger company, people don't admit to when things aren't working. Because I'm sure it's you use the term confirmation bias is right. No one wants to admit a mistake. No one wants to admit, hey, something's not working.
Yep.
And look, if you have 18% market share or 20% market share every year, just mainly because of the brand you represent and your territory is protected, you don't really have to admit something's not working. Business is pretty steady.
Yeah, we often think that maximizing sales or maximizing market share is a natural desire, that it's an actual driver. It's not. You get it's a problem with commission structures, right? They're meant to incentivize towards maximum sales, but they don't. It's the sales rep is still incentivized by his real primary motivation, which is like, I got to make enough money to feed my family and live the way I want to live. And once I achieve that, I could be making 10% commission on every machine sale after that. It's really not worth me. And we somehow still assume that we understand people's primary motivation to be, maximum income, maximum anything. And it's not.
No, you're right. So what's you said you want to stop coding at January 1. What do you see? Are your customers mainly independent dealers, or do you have any larger OEM branded dealers as customers?
Yeah, we do. We have several of the OEMs. I mean, obviously we're not into like the size of dealers like deer dealers or cat dealers. Not yet. We're working our way there. But partially that's because we need to grow, and like we started at the beginning, the sales cycle is just way too long.
Sure.
You start talking to a really big dealer and it's 2 years of work before you really get to turn anything on and maybe even build something.
Mm-hmm.
So we're purposely focused on smaller dealers. So.
Mm-hmm. And what's the goal here in the next couple of years? Just keep bringing on more customers, like stay kind of in that ideal profile of your small, mid-size independent dealers.
No, I mean, we built the platform in a modular way so that we don't have to provide everything. People can take the pieces that they want and even substitute out even some of our pieces for other pieces. So like with a dealer that wants that they use HubSpot, they want to use HubSpot, we can integrate HubSpot just like our own CRM. And that goes back to the tool thing, right? One of the things that we really want to do is put dealers in a position where they own their data, where that data platform, where it's housed, is their long-term strategy.
Do you use AI today?
Yep, in several places.
Where?
I'm not a huge fan of the term, to be honest, but we use AI in the code building itself. I mean, that's if you're running modern tech stack, then there's lots of AI tools for generating code, but also for reviewing code and performance. So like all of our APIs and front end pieces are constantly monitored, and we'll get weekly notifications from the platform that says this code could be more efficient if it was restructured this way. That's an AI implication. We are launching something called Nikki AI, and Nikki's kind of a funny name because when I got started, my first developer, his name is Nick, and then our first implementation guy's name is Nick. And so I was like, well, if we're going to do an AI, it's got to be called Nikki, so that we keep the Nicks going. But it has a couple of things, right? Like AI is partially large language model, and so it's really good for doing things like we implemented in the work order system. Every dealer and supervisor hates writing invoice stories from service reports. Yes. So Nikki reads all the service reports, and Nikki writes the invoice story in a split second. And if you tell Nikki that it's a Spanish customer and the answer has to be in Spanish, she'll write it in Spanish. So I guess I shouldn't call her a she, but whatever. So that's one application, I think, of AI. We're also launching an information or a technical information platform, which is also well suited, as long as you learn to ask real questions. So, it can consume a vast amount of technical documentation from troubleshooting guides and known problems and resolutions and all that kind of stuff. And it understands it in a native, in a language model, right? And so if you ask it proper questions, how do I troubleshoot, hydraulic main valve pressures on a Cat 349? Then it'll go, okay, so I'm looking for, it knows how to answer that question. And so I think that's a really good application of that, because it's able to go through so much more documentation in a natural way rather than tech trying to figure out how the data is structured.
So let's rewind a little bit. I love your idea about writing up the tech story using AI. Makes total sense. Is that in your product today?
Yep.
So I would imagine that your customers, it's made a huge difference because the invoice to the customer now makes a lot more sense. There's more detail. They know what was done. It probably lessens disputes, and also, so I think it's a great example of some of the fear of trying to implement technology is that it removes people, right? Yeah. But here's a way where you're not continually going, because anyone who's worked at a dealership knows what happens. You continually go to the technician and you tell the technician that they're not providing enough information. And it also it's a daily fight. It also leads to really lengthy amount of time between closing a job and invoicing the customer, where you have people who are always chasing the technician for more information so they can get it on the invoice to get it to the customer. Just like real simple things. And that's a perfect incorporation of AI that solves a problem.
Yeah, the supervisors love it. I mean, I've spent enough years as a supervisor that reading a whole bunch of service reports and trying to write a story out of it is a real pain and time consuming. It's, you kind of touch on this idea of invoice cycle, which is such a cultural phenomenon in our industry.
Yes.
I mean, I always give dealers the analogy of going to pick up your car at a car dealership after it was serviced. They're like, yeah, we'll be done in about 10 minutes. So you show up 10 minutes later to pick up your car and they hand you the bill and the keys. And because they had to solve that problem, that you wouldn't sit around and wait for 2 hours for them to finish the work order off and put the parts on it and stuff. You just need the car. So they went through the work to solve all of the technical and information flow and operating procedures to make sure that it was all done. And for some reason in our industry, it's this cultural phenomenon that we're all okay. Oh, yeah, we're closing work orders. We're doing like average 15, 20 days.
Well, yeah, no, that's like using your example because it's right. It's like picking up your car today, December 6th, and then getting the invoice for the work done on your car on January 6th. Yeah. And you're like, what? Yeah. Wait, it was $2,300? And then you try to like read through it and remember what was done. Like, wait, did I approve that to be done? Like, that's what happens. Yeah. And it's a simple thing. It is a phenomenon to this industry. There's so many areas where you just like shoot yourself in the foot with your customers. And a simple thing like invoicing has been a huge pain and a perfect opportunity for AI.
Yeah. And culture shift. I mean, I've been in dealers who they want to do a software project and they say, can you do that? And I'm like, yeah, we can do it, but it's not a software problem. It's a culture problem. You got to fix your culture, Right. You can't, it's sort of like you can't force everything in software to lock down a process because you'll end up having to break or, hack how you use the software in order to get through certain situations. So like we try and remember that in our system too. People are like, what, you can rent a machine on 2 rental contracts at the same time? Like, yeah, well, there could be a reason you need to do that, but we let you do it so that you don't end up making a second copy of the same machine in your system so that you can rent out the second one, because you're still trying to finish the first one. That's sort of, it is a process kind of orientation, but yeah, the service one, I love it. And the amount of dollars that go missing there, I've rarely come across any dealer that has put a good measurement on the cost of that. They don't want to see it, right? It's like stuff you take off the invoice because it's 30 days old already and you haven't sent the invoice and you figure you got to get it through. So you drop some money there and then they get the invoice 2 months after they did the work and they come in and negotiate. It's one of the reasons I didn't become a product support manager. I can remember sitting there and they wanted me to come from one role and then wanted me to be a product support manager at a branch. And it's like, I can't imagine spending every day negotiating invoices with service customers because that seems to be primarily what they do.
Yeah. No, did you like the example you gave with, writing tech stories? Is that something that you came up with the idea based on your background and included it in your product? Or is it something that when you sat down with a customer of yours and they went over like, hey, could you solve this for us? And then that was the result of it?
Yeah, no, that was my idea, but my guys went away and played with it at night and figured out how OpenAI's backend in Microsoft's platform works and tested it a bunch. And then, it wasn't even that hard. Once you understand how the interfaces work and how to feed it the information, adding it in was not that hard. But that's partially because our code, because of its API, to integrate another API inside the cloud is, not hard. You don't do any special tricks.
Yeah, that's so then it just becomes a core part of your product.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're working on, say, the next problem, which is equipment availability or specification matching. So, can we feed in all of the inventory and specifications and status information and locations and stuff, and then be able to ask a natural language question, which every sales rep does of the rental department every day. It's like, hey, do we have a 30 ton with a 36-inch bucket?
Interesting.
You know, and you have to go dig. And so
Sure.
we're seeing that now, that it can answer that question. It's like, yeah, you have two of them in this branch and one in that branch, and they have the right sizes for the bucket that you have in the yard too. So
Impressive. That yeah, that is like these are all little sound like little simple things, but the amount of man hours wasted on
yeah,
doing those things, right? Like you had yeah, we had 20, 25 sales reps. They would frequently dial into the branch to the coordinator. They would ask that exact question. The coordinator would have to stop what they were doing.
yeah,
Probably like arranging transport to like for a rental machine to get from one to a customer's job or something. And they would have to run outside, physically put eyes on the machine
yeah.
in the yard, come back, call that person. Yeah, that's perfect incorporation.
It's
Interesting.
fascinating too, right? Because like the lead time they say on a rental is under 2 hours. If you can't answer that question in under 2 hours, they'll probably find it somewhere else.
Hmm.
And so solving that problem really helps your utilization.
Hmm. It is fascinating. No, I love it. It's and you have such a unique skill set, but also knowledge base. I do think that's part of the reason why there hasn't been much innovation with software is that it really so much of it has to be custom built for the operation. Like we had a CRM system, everyone hated it because it was just like a basic Microsoft CRM, and you're using weird language like cases, like
Yeah.
service jobs were cases. It was like,
Yeah.
and it's just you're trying to make something fit, and that's one of the reasons why to me it doesn't get used.
It's true. It has to be applicable. If you really think about various types of companies, a dealership is actually one of the most complex operations because it
Mm,
has so many different, of all the kinds of transactions that you can do in a business. Think of a warehousing company, think of a
mm,
retail store, think of like the dealerships deal with all of them almost. There's so few, like bill of materials. We even have some of that, like manufacturing language, and I think
mm,
that makes it fairly unique. And then the language is true. Like it's one thing that we did right away is we put a language file in it, and we don't hard code languages because we're working with a dealer in England now, and they don't call it rentals; they call it plant hire. So we can change that language so that it matches their language, and I think that there's a lot of value to that for
mm,
people. Some people want to call them machines, some people call them equipment. You know, in the core we call it assets, but they mean different things to different people.
mm.
I think you find that in a lot of things in this world. Like the meaning of words is a lot more powerful than you think. It sets
Sure.
up expectations in people.
Yeah, you lose credibility if the terminology is wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's plenty of shoehorning projects out there. People trying to shoehorn in their process or their business into a tool. So
Hmm. I'm assuming that you're developing into somewhat of a thought leader now that you're years into this, more customers, like I would imagine, right?
yeah, I do that for a few people. It's mostly because I'm opinionated. um, but yeah, I thought it's something that our industry needs to talk about. I think you and I talked about it at AED a couple of years ago, that there was this change in people, right? And by having presentations on going digital, on the digital dealership kind of idea, at first, years ago, it was like kind of crazy talk. But then I think you and I both commented on that, that a few years later, the topic, because it had been introduced so many times, now people are more open and it seemed more realistic to them. And so I think thought leadership is just putting ideas out there.
I mean, everybody's doing it. Everybody has taken advantage of convenience and ease in their personal lives. Like, why wouldn't they want it in their professional life? Like, nobody wants to sit and call 8 different salespeople. No one wants to, call a landline to try to schedule a mechanic, a technician. No one wants to do that.
They really don't. I mean, they really just want the problem solved, right? In the end, that's what people are trying to do. It's nice to have
customers
relationships.
coming and picking up parts.
Yeah. It's nice to have those relationships, but they're secondary to what people are trying to get done. And I think you see that in younger generations. They don't get, they get pleasure of life out of the stuff outside work. I definitely come from a generation still where work was life and they got a lot of the joy in life. But I think I see people nowadays, they just want to get the job done as fast as they can or as well as they can and then go off and live life.
Yeah. I mean, and the relationship thing, I think people are just trying to say, I'm really important in this whole transaction. I mean, that's really what you're saying when you make that big of a deal about it. And that's how it comes out. But
I think people's memories in all industries, but even in ours, this is how it's always been kind of memory. I don't think you have to look that far back to realize that culture that everyone thinks has always been there actually didn't exist years ago. It was different, and so then people are hard pressed just to agree and understand that change is just natural. That the role of the sales rep, the role of the parts and service person, the role of the service manager, is constantly evolving. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you look back before the internet, dropping off brochures was a value added activity because they weren't going to get the information any other way. And now it's simply not. So you have to change that role. And I think that's
and I don't know of a single service manager that's not stressed out to the max. Right? Same with parts managers.
Yeah.
And so, they're begging for help. And help isn't in the form of more people. Help is in the form of like tools that help them get their job done easier.
Yeah, which goes kind of back to the idea of what information does to help you understand what's really happening. And that, especially in service, we lose so much time that we think is just normal. I always found it interesting that over the years that I was in service, the feeling of how long something should take seemed to always grow. You'd quote a job one time and be like, it's 20 hours to do that. And then for some reason, it took 25 hours in reality. And the next time you quoted, it was 25 hours. And then the next time it was 30 hours. And you're just quoting more and more for the same job. And partially because there's no control on the work getting done, especially in jobs. And that's like this shifting mindset. And when I was around long enough and you start to see that, you're like, what's the actual thing that's happening here? Am I short technicians? Well, no, I actually should be spending time on training my technicians how to work efficiently so I don't need as many. Right? We've all got that guy in the shop, and you see a ton of it now with the independent mechanics. There's that guy who can swap an engine in 8 hours, but you ask someone else and you're like, oh, swap an engine's 40 hours. It's like, okay, so it's the same job done by 2 different people. Why does one guy do it in 8? Like, well, watch him. I had a good friend who was a really great mechanic, and he worked with 2 hands, and while he's undoing this bolt over here, with that hand, he's already looking over and he's grabbing the wrench on the next one and he starts on it. And when he's done, he pulls it and then when he's done whatever task, he doesn't stand around and admire his work and think about what should I do next. He's already been thinking about that, and he just goes on and carries on. And if you do that suddenly and you train that into people, then you need less people. Now I can do 5 engines in a week instead of 1. I don't need 5 mechanics.
Right.
I think AI, going back to like the technical database, I think AI can help out a lot there, where given the tool in the tech's hand and that he can literally talk to the mobile app and say, give me a troubleshooting guide for this machine on that, and it just pops it up and walks through it. I'm like, how much time did you just save?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I watched a young tech at a dealership spend, say, 8 hours troubleshooting a water pump on a water truck. It's like, how did that happen? And it just got written off, right? Like the 8 hours went on the work order and it got written off.
It could have been billed to the customer first.
But it's like a 1-hour job.
Sure. Completely.
So I think that's part of our industry challenge, but I won't solve it for all the big dealers so that you can keep going.
I was just gonna say that. I was like, can you like keep some of these ideas like to yourself? Because I know of a certain company that already uses AI and is creating a tremendous competitive advantage within field service. So let's keep a few of these ideas to ourselves.
That's a funny space. So you guys are basically trying to approach the same thing, the same problem.
Yeah, we use AI for certain things already. It's pretty amazing, and our process is kind of similar. Like I'm the one who's like, hey, what could we do this? Or like I'll explain to our engineering team, like this is the challenge for a technician. And we also employ a technician as well. And so like he can speak from personal experience. Like these are the hard things for me out in the field. And then, I don't know what's possible with some of these things. And then our engineering team will come back and be like, well, what if we did this? And this is how it could work. And it's just, I just think back to when I was at the dealership and I'm like, just those little things. Like, that's why I kept asking you, trying to dig on the tech story. It's like, we had X amount of people whose only job was to close work orders.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here and like one of the keys for our success as a company is scale. Is like, so if you have a dealership that has 30 people that close work orders, and we're a technology company and we want to do service work across the country and we don't have to have anyone to close a work order, like think of that advantage. So yeah, but
I'm curious on this point because like you've also gone, one, you pivoted, and two, you've had some iterations. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, but I think one of the things that people have forgotten or people don't know now is how much that whole world of building tools and then throwing them out and just taking everything you learn about how it's supposed to work and just redoing it, that seemed crazy because you used to put like 6 months of coding into something. Mm-hmm. And if that wasn't right, then you're hard pressed to throw it out. You start reworking it.
Yeah.
But nowadays it's so fast that why wouldn't you just say, okay, I learned how the process worked. I learned that I structured it wrong the first time, and now I'm just going to build a new version knowing what I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think one of the mistakes that I made in the early days was that we overbuilt our first product. And so the downside of me having industry experience was I wanted the first product to do X, Y, and Z. And I wasn't satisfied with going to market unless it did those things. And, most startups that are successful, they start with what's termed an MVP, a minimum viable product. And so the bare minimum to get it into customers' hands, to then observe behavior, to see, because, it's in the beginning, it's just an idea, but to see if it resonates, see how customers use it. And so I overbuilt the first iteration and tried to take that as a lesson going forward of like, hey, if we're going to introduce something new, then it's not overbuilt. It's very rudimentary. But it has to get used. And then when you see it used in real everyday environments, then you can find like, okay, this doesn't work as intended, and so we needed to tweak this. But I've really enjoyed that experience. And that's why it's also really important, you'd mentioned like the understanding your customers. That's why it's so important when you have something like in the early days to target the right customers who will be patient, who don't expect perfection, but their pain point is so high that they'll work with you. And so, just like I didn't understand those things in the early days, like, cause I was excited about our opportunity. I was excited about what we were doing. And I thought, hey, everyone could benefit from it. But you just learn like, no, like there's a certain segment of this customer base that we're going to need to be in business for like 5 to 8 years. Like it's got to look and do those things before they would really, but that's okay. There's plenty of other customers who are dying for what we do, and they'll take a look at the MVP and they'll help us figure out like what needs to be better, and they won't freak out that it's not perfect.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think that's a lesson well learned. We're forced to do that just because the platform's so broad. With all dealer functions from e-commerce to warranty, we have no choice but to push MVP.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I think one of the good things has been, and one of my goals is to use this experience to show customers that their past expectations or past experience in this realm isn't what it is now, right? So in the past, if you had like an old legacy dealer software, if you asked for a change, either it was impossible or it was going to take a year and it was going to cost a ton of money, and because even finding the guy who wrote that original code, they got to fly him back from, Barbados, where he's been sitting on the beach for 20 years to show you where to do it. And so my goal has also been to kind of re-educate and reinvigorate customers into believing that if they say, oh, can I get that there? Or can I get this here? And like, yeah, it's not on our roadmap, but if you want that, we can do that in like 4 hours. So if you are cool with picking up the bill for 4 hours, we'll do it for you right away. And like that gets people's wheels spinning again, right? That lets them see that where they want to go, where they want to iterate, that's accessible now, and they don't have to evaluate from this idea of, like you said, it has to have everything right, because you're not going to get to change it. And instead, it's now like I can start MVP and I can implement MVP at a dealership, and then we can just turn on and add in the things that they're really going to need as they also grow in that mindset.
How do you deal with custom requests? Like, I would imagine it could be a difficult thing where, I mean, let's face it, a lot of dealers probably like, no, we're different than everyone else, and so we're gonna want this. We're gonna want it to do this. Because I would imagine you've got to toe a line of, does this make sense to build, and then does it have application for our other customers so it would make sense to include in our product? How do you handle that?
So there are certain things that have come up where I would say to the customer, like, okay, that's a significant thing and brings significant value. And sometimes we'll partner on something if we think that it's a significant value to other people as well. Occasionally we've done some things that are sort of unique to that dealer or give them a competitive advantage. And so then we say, that's fine. We can put that in and it won't become part of the general code base, or it won't be accessible by the general code base. But on the other hand, you have to also be able to say, like, yeah, we can do that, but that is a generic idea. And it's going to have to become part of the general code base. And I guess I'm sort of lucky in that sense that I can sit and talk about the operational requirements and the information requirements and what it takes to develop it and make that decision sort of in my head and work the customer or the dealer to that same point. Like, what if we want to do it this way? It's okay, I see what you want to do, but what if you thought about it this way? And then get them to see it from a more generic perspective, maybe. And then they go, yeah, that'll meet our needs. Like, some people don't know, right? Like, one of the lessons I learned years ago was it's pretty hard for people to have new ideas around how to do something, right? Like, go into a place with, say, how the warehouse is laid out. And that's just how it's always been. And the people who've always worked there, they don't have an idea. So I took them to a different warehouse run by, like, Granger or something like that. Let them see that. Let them see how that runs. And now suddenly they come back to their own warehouse and they're like, oh, I get it now. Now I have some new ideas. It's one of the good things about people who move around is they have seen it done different ways and can get the pros and cons. So that's sort of the approach to how to deal with a dealer that says, oh, this is a unique way we do it. Like, well, this is what you're trying to accomplish. But I think that's actually the most fun part of my job. Like, the part that, I'm going to hire someone like you to run the business one day, and I'm going to keep doing the part where I get to have those conversations every day.
Well, I appreciate your time. It was good to catch up and talk technology. Just a reminder, let's slow down a little bit on some of these AI features. Give us until like 2026, and then you can go full speed. Just work on the basics with your customers.
Will do, sir. Will do.
I appreciate that. Great to talk.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.